Okay. Last of Us. As a reminder, going to be covering the details. It's a recap of episode 1 of season 2 Last of Us. I'm going to be doing one of these for every single episode that's coming out until May 24th, which is the finale. This presentation is in mind. How do I? This recap follows not only the show but also the gameplay, because we not only played the first game but also the second game. So this recap and my thoughts are following not only the show and how they go about doing it, but also comparison to the game and the themes and everything connected there. Quick disclaimer even feels dumb because it's like, just heads up, these are my opinions. So I could be completely wrong with how the theme is approached. I could be completely left field with my opinions and thoughts about the show. Just know that these are my opinions and my thoughts about how I'm experiencing the show. Everybody is welcome to have their own thoughts. Please give your input. I would love to know what you experienced when you saw the episode, your thoughts, how things were approached, all those kind of things. Just wanted to put that out there because I don't want people to think that I'm claiming that I know anything or everything about this show. I am merely just a lovable viewer. Okay, so season 2, episode 1. Lots were covered, but I also felt like there was a lot that wasn't touched on quite yet. So I have mixed feelings about episode 1. There was a few things that I really enjoyed that they did in the first episode, and there's some things that I wish that they would have done more. Now, mind you, this is 7 episodes in one season. There's a lot of areas specifically I feel in The Last of Us Part 2 that had so many fleshed out areas that really allowed us to get a great overview of Joel and Ellie, the relationships between them and what was happening in part 2, but also with Abby and her dad. And I felt like things had to be skipped, and I think they tried really hard to cover enough bases with the time that they had, which is, each episode's an hour. So the opening, which was basically them showing, after the recap, they show that Jill went on basically a spree throughout the hospital. And this is showing the idea of the impact on Abby. So they open with Abby, which I found to be kind of interesting because I don't fully remember that happening in the game, although I might be incorrect. However, the first time we met Abby, I believe we met her and she was young. She was with her dad, and he was pulling zoo animals and stuff like that to help them because he's a doctor. So he was basically trying to do some good. It was in the game, I found that to be a really special moment between her and her dad, not only getting light between Abby and who she was before Joel came in, but also who her dad was and what he kind of stood for. Whereas in the show, they start with the Firefly funeral and these, 5 kids ultimately burying the rest of the Fireflies. They were already a small group to begin with, and then it's just left to Abby and the gang. So I don't remember all their names, but I assume that I could pull the list of names, but this is all, the ones that really kind of rang true for me. Actually, just so I'm doing this justice, because I want to make sure I'm talking about them properly. So there's Mel in the middle. We have apparently nobody else. No, we have more. Hold on. So Mel is in the middle. We have Owen. We have Nora. And then we have Manny. I'm almost convinced there was another person in this group, but I might be wrong about that. I feel like there was another guy, but if I don't remember it, I'm sure the character wasn't incredibly memorable. What I do like about this scene that we see here is they're all standing by the grave site, and Abby is looking another direction, which kind of I thought was like very thematic of this like idea that they're still mourning what could have been, and Abby is looking towards the future of what she's going to do. Abby's character in the game was incredibly driven. She had set goals, even though they were with, I would consider like somewhat malicious intent, and they even show that, and I'll show that later in my presentation, that they talk about that she wanted to destroy because Joel had destroyed what she held so dearly, so she wanted to do the same to him. So I like this kind of like juxtaposition of like these guys are mourning. You can see like Manny here is in a moment of like thinking about what he's going to do. It's like reflective, whereas like Abby's ready to move on and to take care of business. So I really liked this shot. Abby's character really, I think like we don't get to see her enough in this episode, and her introduction felt like a little bit rushed to me. But what I will say is the moment, it felt so like half and half for me, because what I really liked about the game was that Abby was introduced, and it was almost like we were in the dark as much as anybody else, as much as Joel was, I would say, about like who Abby was, what her intentions were. Whereas in the first episode, like the first like 5 minutes, they show what Abby wants to do, which is she wants to go find Joel, and she wants to kill him. That's an aggressive word. She wants to get rid of him, and she stops and she turns back to Owen and she says slowly, which I liked this from the actress, because I feel like it really showed her acting chops as to her being Abby. I feel like I was able to like really latch into her character and like what her goal was in mind. However, I also felt like, why would you say that? Why would you have to explain slowly? Like, I almost wish they would have introduced that thought later on when everything kind of happens in the game. I liked the idea of the game taking you by surprise. Whereas like if I was a person watching this show for the first time and I hadn't experienced the video game, which was always kind of like the approach that I had come to, was I almost wanted the sense of surprise. And now I don't feel surprised because she's already set her clear intentions. So it felt like a really kind of half and half experience of, I liked the way that they displayed her character. I think the actress did an incredibly good job at portraying Abby. I will say that, sorry, I'm pulling up her name. Caitlin Dever, I think she had a lot kind of like going for her for Abby, of people being like, I don't think she's going to do the role well. Abby is like a muscle mommy and we all know it. Caitlin Dever is not. She's quite petite. So she needed to present herself as Abby with like almost a set of intimidation that she couldn't physically show, because Abby she appears physically intimidating because she's so muscular. Whereas this version of Abby, she's smaller, she's more petite. I was hoping that they were going to be able to show that sense of intimidation. I feel like Caitlin did that. Again, we've only seen a piece of her. I think this shows a lot of emotion, whereas Abby in the game was very kind of like stoic. She didn't really show a ton of emotion until you started to hash out her feelings and experiences a little bit more. Whereas this time around, we really see Abby hurt in the show, which I also didn't hate. I like seeing that like emotional kind of like fleshing out, but I just wish that we had more time. This kind of follows the same idea of like who the surgeon is. I really liked the introduction that they gave to Abby's dad, and like showing that he had a very kind heart. He was like people focused first, and they don't really show that with the show. They don't show the contrast point of the surgeon. They just show what happened to the surgeon. Granted, they don't really show don't really talk about the surgeon yet. Like, even when they're talking about the funeral, they're like, the one person that could have done anything is now gone, and they're like, don't talk about it, don't talk about it. But they never highlight this idea that the surgeon was Abby's dad. So that means that they're going to show it later, which makes sense. But it almost, again, it feels like, why would you leave anticipation towards the surgeon but not leave anticipation towards what Abby wanted to do to Joel? So it felt a little rushed. It felt a little messy. I felt like there was gaps and holes, which really could have like had future impact on the viewers that were watching this show. And I really liked this particular scene in the game where Abby and her dad I think they're going to help a zebra. In the show, they show giraffes, but in the game, I think it's a zebra that they're trying to heal. And it really allows them to have like a father-daughter relationship. It shows the contrast of like Abby and her dad versus Ellie and Joel, and like that fatherly daughter relationship. And I just feel like we're missing that, but maybe they're going to show it later in a later episode. I just felt like it was straight to the point, and I wish that they would have given a little bit more context so that people who weren't playing the video game and were watching the show for the first time could be a little bit more emotionally connected, because that was like the other big thing, was when things really start happening in the game, your emotions are so connected and tied to these characters that you experience the grief that they're going through. And I feel like the show is rushing that, and we're not going to be able to meet the full capacity of grief that this game brought us to. When we dip into Joel and Ellie's life in the town that they've like kind of laid foundation in, there was some really special moments. And this is what I really liked in this episode. Firstly being that Dina and Joel, they connect. Joel's trying to build something and Dina comes in like asking for help, and then they start diving into conversation. At this point, Joel sees Dina as like Ellie's best friend, and you can already tell that there is like friction between Joel and Ellie, although they don't show why there's friction. And the difference in topics that they talk about in this part of the episode, I really, really loved. Dina is asking Joel about like electrical stuff, and then she'll be like, so why does like Ellie hate you? And then he will kind of like rush past it, and then she'll be like, okay, back to electrical stuff. And then as she's talking about electrical stuff, Joel comes in and he's like, I don't know, she's just 19, and like, how am I supposed to connect with her? And do you think that I'm doing okay? And it's like this, they're trying to lean into each other and get to know each other. And there's this sense of like normalcy within like social dynamics that you don't really get to see in the first season because they're constantly fighting for their life. But it also shows just such a special dynamic between Dina and Joel that I feel like we didn't get to see in the video game, being that Dina ends up becoming such a prominent figure in Ellie's life. I really liked this moment, and I think it showed a potential that we don't necessarily get to see in the video game. So I really liked this. This was also a really cool scene. I actually was surprised that they included this, because I thought, based on how they kind of brushed by Abby's story and her interactions with the rest of the Fireflies, I thought that they were going to skip by this, but they didn't. They included Tommy and Ellie's shooting range scene. Basically, Tommy's trying to teach Ellie how to like shoot clickers from far away. They're on like a ski hill lodge, and it just shows this like development of family ties. Ellie's starting to become a part of something. She's starting to develop like a unit with people. And it also shows Tommy like connecting with Ellie and laying that foundation, because in the future we start to see that like Tommy also becomes a prominent figure in this show, and he has his own kind of dilemmas, and his own personality really starts to show in part 2 versus part 1. And I like that they show this dynamic of like Ellie and Tommy are on really good terms, and Tommy can understand Ellie because Ellie has a lot of similarities to Joel, and so Tommy can reach Ellie in a way that I think even Joel can't reach her, because he knows how to work with his brother. So it just shows like she's like Joel, even though they're not family by like, you know, like it's like that statement like you're not born into the family that you choose your family kind of thing. I feel like this shows that like Ellie's a lot like Joel, even though they are not like biologically related. They almost like adopted each other into that relationship. So I really liked this scene, and I was surprised that they showed it, but it also allowed to like lay this foundation of like Ellie is like, she's extending her foundation out. She's starting to like grow within herself. Now she's not like focusing on constantly trying to survive and like being on her own, I think, in the first season and the first game. Ellie's just trying to like figure out who she is and where she belongs, because she's just been alone most of her life, and you can start to see that like this is where she belongs. Same thing with Joel. I really liked this part that I feel like they didn't really show in the video game. Granted, this nephew of Joel's, he's not in the game. Tommy doesn't end up having a son in the game, but they introduced that into the first season. Whereas this was really nice because it showed like Joel connecting with younger kids again. He's part of a council. He's helping like build out the town more. He's a well-respected individual in the town. And he's starting to like bring some normalcy back into his life. And it felt like this like moment, it was like a 5-minute moment in the show where it almost felt like he had a moment of peace, and he could connect back to this idea that like regardless of the things that he's experienced in the past, he has potential to move forward in the future. There's things that he can fight for. And I thought that that was really special to show that side of it, because him and Ellie are estranged in this moment, and they show it in the show that they're not really connecting. But he has other things he can fight for, which I really liked. This part of the show is so interesting to me. So this is something that was not included in the video game at all. You don't see anything in terms of like how Joel is experiencing not only the grief of like everything that him and Ellie went through, but what he did to save Ellie and the choices that he made. He made some incredibly destructive choices in order to save Ellie, but he did it for Ellie, and he did it because he had finally found something to fight for, and he wasn't going to give that up. And he meets with this she's not a psychiatrist, she's something else, a psychotherapist or something like that, and it's Catherine O'Hara. Catherine O'Hara is like one of my favorite actresses. She's Canadian girlies rise. Like I love this actress so much. Like she is amazing in Schitt's Creek. So when I saw her in the trailers, I was like, what, like who is she gonna be in this show? And very quickly you realize that she and Joel are meeting each other, I think weekly, to do like therapy sessions. But she's like straight to the point. She doesn't sugarcoat stuff. She's not like your typical therapist that you would think of. She's like direct with Joel. And the background story of this, and this is all stuff that was like fabricated in the show. This isn't in the game, but she's mad at Joel because for some reason, we don't know the context yet, Joel had to take out her husband. I assume he had been bitten or something. And it was her first year. It was her birthday when they did this, when they were doing the scene. Like the character, and it was the first year without her husband. And so she starts the conversation by saying, I'm going to say something that scares me to say out loud, but I need to be honest. And she told Joel that she hated him for taking her husband out of her life. She's like, I know why you had to do it, I understand, but it was how you did it that makes me so angry. And we don't know what Joel did. And then she goes, now tell me what's actually going on between you and Ellie. And Joel can't say it. He like can't bring the words to say it. So she starts asking him, you know, did you hurt her? Did you do this? Did you do this? And he finally stops and he takes a moment, and the only thing he says is, I saved her. And there's this like really, like Pedro Pascal is so phenomenal playing this character because he shows such nuances of the emotions that Joel is going through in ways that I don't think even the video game was able to show. And it's this idea that you see him first grieve with the fact that he did this. He's guilty. He feels upset that he did this. He's not proud of what he did. And then there's this like level of darkness that comes into his eyes, and that's this photo here where he says, I saved her. And it's almost like, I will do whatever I have to do for her to survive, and I refuse to feel guilty. Like it was like this weird moment where you almost see like two sides of him, and it's like this great peek behind Joel as a character that again I feel like we didn't get to see in the game because Joel isn't like a prominent character in the second game. Ellie is the main character of that story, whereas Joel was the main character of the first game. And so this was a really special moment. And the other thing too that I found is like there's a darkness within him that is still pending, which allows I think the person who's watching the show for the first time to start to understand the dynamics of why people make decisions the way that they do, because that was something that game players, myself included in the second game, you start pointing fingers at different characters and blaming them for the choices that they've made and who's the culprit and who's the villain. And I feel like they're really starting to lay the foundation of there's no such thing as black and white morals. Everything is gray area. And they show that with Joel. So I really liked this scene. It was a surprise though, because it's completely new. This is just like a tidbit moment. So this is a scene where you can see on the left here, this is Ellie and Dina. This is Jesse. So Jesse is the male, he is one of the main male characters. He previously dated Dina, and he's friends with these two. He's a few years older, and so there's almost like this like younger sibling, big brother kind of like engagement that happens during this scene where they're about to go out for reconnaissance, and he's trying to tell the girls like, you're only doing recon, like listen to the, you know, the leader of the group. And they're almost like talking back, and like they raise their hand, and like the sarcasm, it was like incredibly tasteful. And I think these three actors did a really good job at like showing the dynamic of them just being kids and being friends, and like how they've become really close. So I really liked that. This is just a shout out to some of the characters in this episode that I think were casted phenomenally well. I love, hold on, I'm gonna pull up her name again. Isabel Merced, I think is how you say that. She is just, not only does she look like Dina, she acts like Dina. She has this softness Dina was one of my favorite characters in the second game. I think she's soft, she's gentle. She brings Ellie back to a safe place, but then she's also sarcastic, and she meets Ellie where she's at. And I just think she's doing such a good job, and I'm so, so happy she got casted as Dina. 10 out of 10. Jesse, I also think Jesse was a great cast. I was kind of skeptical about, what is his name? Young Manzino being casted as Jesse, because he was in Beef and he kind of had a different character, and I didn't know if he could really show like not only the sarcasm of Jesse, but Jesse, he has this like sense of stability. You know, he's like a developing leader in the town. And so for him to like have that connection with Ellie, I think he's doing a really good job as Jesse, and I'm curious to see where he goes in the show. And then I feel like this is my opinion, because I feel like some people wouldn't agree, but I actually really, really like Caitlin Dever as Abby. She brings the personality alive for me, even though she may not physically show the same. Although I think she looks a lot like Abby, I think she's going to bring a sense of like humanity to Abby that the show watchers probably need for the next things that are about to unfold. We got to meet the stalker in this episode. I remember when Ellie falls through the floor and she falls into the grocery store. I was watching the scene and I was like, I remember this scene being stressful, and I cannot for the life of me remember why. And then they introduced the stalker, and I'm like, holy shit. That is why it was so stressful, because they introduced a stalker for the first time, and you're trying to like navigate how to approach the stalker in the video game, because they're not like the clickers. They almost like bring you out, and then they jump on you or something, like they sneak attack, they stalk you, versus the clickers where they just like go in for the attack. I don't know who this actress is that did the portrayal of the stalker, but the way she like barked and like yelped, and like the way she crawled, like 10 out of 10 performance. She got the stalker vibes 100% down. I remember watching and being like, I cannot believe, like I feel like I'm playing the game right now. I feel the sense of like hesitation to want to approach. I just think it was so well done. They were talking about the stalker like it was the first time that they had seen it, which I was like, nah, I don't love that. I wish that it was just kind of like, oh, here's this new creature, but it already kind of existed. It's just coming closer to us. But I thought this was so cool, the way they introduced it. So, and I was not expecting to see the stalker so soon. Just a moment for this part of the show where Ellie and Dina are dancing at the community like hall New Year's Eve event. I think that they did a shot for shot comparison of what happened in the game versus the show. She even says, like, one thing I really liked in the video game is when Ellie's like, all these guys are staring at you. Dina's like, I think they're staring at you because they're jealous. And Ellie's like, they have nothing to be jealous of. And she's like, well, I think they should be terrified. And it's her finally like telling Ellie, like, I'm interested in you. And this is the reason why nothing else has worked out. And I think they did a really good way. I was kind of worried about the chemistry between these two actresses, but I think Bella Ramsey did a really good job at showing Ellie's like hesitancy. So a better love story than Twilight. Oh, that's hard. I mean, he calls her spider monkey. It's just like really, you know, apples to oranges. But I think seeing this dynamic unfold, the way that Dina cares about Ellie, it makes you feel all warm inside. And it just makes you really happy to see the two of them together. So I'm really excited to start seeing this relationship like flesh out, because we're going to start to see them like really connect. But they did a shot for shot, and I think it was perfect. After this too, there's this one scene where somebody in the town, he calls Ellie and Dina just the most homophobic word you can possibly call them. They did it, and I was like, wow, okay, I'm surprised you threw that in there, but they did. And then Joel punches this guy, and during that scene, Ellie goes, I didn't ask you for your help. And you start to see like Ellie is mad at Joel, and she's not about to quickly forgive him for what he's done. And so you start to understand that like something happened. And I feel like if you were an avid watcher of the first season, you can very quickly tie together what happened, which is very clearly she found out that Joel took her without her permission when she was willing to sacrifice herself for the greater good of the world, for a vaccine. He made a choice without including her in it, and then he lied to her. We haven't seen how that unfolds yet, and you don't see it in the game either, but there's this really interesting moment of, you see very quickly Joel shows just hurt and guilt, but also just like devastation for the crumbling of his relationship with Ellie. He can't rebuild what he's done. And it made me really think back to this idea of a parent. Like, what are you willing to do for your children? And what are you willing to sacrifice? Joel made this choice. In this second photo here, this is when he finds Ellie in the town where she gets abducted. And she has, you know, she's taken somebody out for the first time ever, and she's completely traumatized, and it's the first time that he like accepts her, I think, as his own, and her as well. And you can see the sense of like he's willing to do whatever he needs to do for Ellie in this photo, and he's fully accepted her. And this idea that she's fully rejected him in this scene, the contrast is crazy to me. And I think this idea of like Joel did everything he did for Ellie, even though it was possibly also for selfish reasons, because he wasn't willing to lose another daughter again. He now has to bear the weight of his decision to choose Ellie's life without her permission. And you can see that it weighs heavy on him here. So I thought this was quite interesting, the contrast of pictures. And then right at the end of the episode, we see the very well-known scene where Abby sees the town for the first time. And very quickly you start to realize, okay, there's going to be like intersecting connections here. But in the game, you don't realize why she's looking at the town. And I really liked that. In the show, you do. The view is like almost dominating in this idea that like she knows what she has to do in the show, whereas in the game you don't fully understand or discover what her intention is yet. So even though both shots are incredibly similar, the theme and the approach to how they went about it in the show versus the game is completely different. This is also a really special scene because you see her interact with Owen for the first time. And you get to see that there's like an unspoken relationship there, and he was the one that found the view, and then he grabbed Abby to show her. So it shows this connectedness between the team, whereas in the show she shows up to the view of the town for the first time with everybody else involved. And again, it just felt rushed. It felt like you could have left room for a little bit more. You could have showed us, like, at this point we don't know anything about the other Fireflies. And in the show, you get to know them a little bit. And so it just, I don't know, this part of the show really kind of bothers me because it was such a prominent part of what happens in part 2, and they're rushing through it because there's only 7 episodes. So I totally understand why they have to do it, but it doesn't feel like it's going to have the same impact as it did in the game. And I'm strongly convinced that episode 2 is going to be where the most well-known, heartbreaking, gut-wrenching scene in this game will go down. And I'm curious to see how they're going to go about that. They also hinted to this idea of like the fungus growing in pipes in the town where Ellie and Joel are, and then some heat at the end of the episode like causes the fungus to almost like wake up again. And so I feel like that's them hinting to this idea of what caused a flood of clickers to attack, which I'm almost certain we're going to see it in the second episode. So, I mean, there were things that I liked about the episode, and there were things that I didn't. I can understand where they're coming from of feeling like they need to, they need to show certain areas and flesh certain things out, which they did very well, but then they also shortened, I think, very important parts that could apply to the rest of the show. But I'm curious to see how they're going to fill that in, because I feel like I've seen in the first season, they would almost like try to play piggyback very quickly to show more detail and more information. So this is the first episode. There's still a lot of opportunity, a lot of room for us to see and learn more about the main characters, but I'm not disappointed. I feel like I walked into the first episode expecting to be a little disappointed because there's just so much weighing on the show as like a person who played that, like the games, and part 2 being like, experiencing part 2 was almost life-changing for me. It was such a amazing game that I was like, there's no way they're going to be able to replicate it. But they did really good things. You know, they did the same thing they did in season 1, where they almost bring the glass bottle back. So you throw Ellie throws the glass bottle to like distract the clickers. And there's little aspects that only the people playing the video games would probably respect and understand and like really appreciate. And they carry that into the first episode. So I do like you feel connected to it. But I am curious to see how it's going to go down. My husband is watching it with me, and he never played the games. He maybe started the first game, but he never played the second game. So the season is a completely new plot for him. And I'm curious to see how he's going to experience it. And I'm going to get his insights as I continue to show these presentations and explain my thoughts on each episode, because I'm somebody who played the game, who's expecting certain things, but he's not. And I'm curious to see if the developers of this show reach the first time watchers, because that is something that I really leaned into. Was I hoped that people who were watching the show for the first time were going to go through the same emotional experience that people who played the game for the first time did. So that's episode 1 of The Last of Us. I think this is where it's going to go down. Everything that we are waiting for, episode 2 is going to be the moment where it happens. So we're just going to have to wait and see. But that's my recap.